I'm Terry Wood. I'm a state representative from Darien and Norwalk, and very proud parent of a son who graduated from Norwalk Community College and love this place. I'm with colleagues Gail Lavielle representing Wilton, Westport, and Norwalk, and Fred Wilms representing Norwalk and New Canaan. I'm not going to belabor this because you've been here for a while this morning, but it is factually inaccurate that the budget came out 4 hours, 2 hours, or whatever they said before. The Republican budget has been out since April 20th. April 20th, in full detail, all the details. So that's factually inaccurate. The other inaccuracies are cutting funds. Yes, we do make decisions. I think most of you are aware our state is in a very difficult financial situation. We are bleeding jobs, we are bleeding people. People are leaving the state, businesses are not coming here. We have to challenge the status quo. That is, it's very simple. We want jobs here, we want to draw people here. One of the reasons community colleges were cut, and there was a rescission, most definitely, there are 4 community colleges within 12 miles of Hartford. We are asking one of those to be closed. NCC is not going to suffer at all. NCC is I think, the most, well, that's my personal opinion, but I know the numbers back it up. It is the most vibrant and viable community college in the state of Connecticut. NCC will not see a cut in funding. So you all need to understand that. The other factually inaccuracies are supporting the working poor. I think we have, as representatives of the people, and we do represent the people, we represent the people first and not our party, but we do have the obligation to support everyone in our state. And as far as supporting the working poor, the Democratic budget cuts the Care for Kids program, which supports families receiving child care, and it also cuts, almost eliminates, the Connecticut Home Care program, which supports seniors aging in their homes. So it's inaccurate to spin something very small into something more global that loses its meaning. And at that, I'll turn it over to Gail and Fred. And thank you all very much for being here and supporting Norwalk Community College. I just wanted to say one other thing. The Democratic budget does raise taxes by $1.45 billion. And those are taxes. Those aren't revenues. Those aren't funny gimmicks. And they also, the CBAC agreement, the state union agreement, many people across the state wanted to see more modifications in the benefits. It's not opposing collective bargaining, but more common sense modifications against the budget. So, and we stood for that. So that's partly why we're having to make the cuts that we did. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry, and good morning, everyone. My colleague, Representative Morris, took the words right out of my mouth. I always say that Norwalk Community College is our gem. It is the community college in Connecticut that everyone looks up to. So it's always a pleasure to be here with you, and it was wonderful to hear from the students and former students of Norwalk Community College. And thank you to David Levinson for his hospitality. I think it is useful to go back for a moment to look at why we have insisted that our budget is a bipartisan budget.
Thank you.
Yes, it was introduced by House and Senate Republicans. Yes, it was introduced in April, continually revised, continually made available to the public, and in a last revision, which was due to the fact that the deficit from the current year was growing, we made a formal presentation on the Tuesday before the vote that you all know about a couple of weeks ago. But and of course you know there were several Democrats who voted with Republicans to pass the budget. But here is the other thing that I think people forget sometimes. The mere fact that our budget exists today is a compromise in itself. The people that you have just heard speak to you joined many others to vote for a full 1/3 of that budget that is now in effect. That is the CBAC agreement that was approved by a majority of legislators, all in the majority party, on July 24th. Had that agreement not been approved, and had we been able to realize more of the savings that Republicans had discussed and proposed very openly back in April and May and June, we would not be in the bind that we are in now with far less resources available to fund everything that Connecticut needs. That's why the choices that have to be made now are much harder than they would have been last spring. So the mere fact, once that agreement passed, it certainly would have been entirely feasible and possible to say, we can't do it. We can't do what we originally proposed and asked for a vote on back in June, so we're not going any farther. We're giving up. But the House and Senate Republicans didn't do that because we feel responsible for making sure that we do the very best that we can, even under the most extenuating of circumstances, for all of the people in Connecticut, not just for those who benefited from the CBAC contract. And I don't begrudge them that, by the way, either. They're taxpayers, they're people who need social services in Connecticut, they're people who attend our higher education system and our public schools. So this is hurting them as much as it hurts anybody else. So I would say in just a couple of more words about the bipartisan budget that has passed. No other budget has. I will just say a couple of other words and then pass off to Fred Wilms. The budget actually flat funds, maintains last year's level of funding to every single public school district in Connecticut, and municipal aid to every single town. There is a formula that is proposed in the budget that will go into effect if something even better is not identified first, because we're open to things that are better always, just as we are now. And the formula over time aims at lowering gradually, with no surprises, funding to wealthier towns and increasing it for districts more in need, like Norwalk. Some of the cuts that you will see in the budget are not cuts that Terry wants, or Gail wants, or Fred wants, or Themis and Len want. We don't like cutting anything unless it's a real waste, and certainly these things are not. But one of the things that we do in our budget, for example, one of the choices we made was to fully fund day and employment services for individuals with intellectual disabilities and their families. No other budget does that. They have no other way to get that funding. My colleagues will mention other things that we do fund, but I think those are very important things to keep in mind. Choices have to be made by responsible people when they are trying to do the most responsible thing for the entirety of the population in very extenuating times. And our view is, if there are things people don't like, there are things the governor doesn't like, let's talk about them. Let's talk about them now. We have a budget that passed with a majority of votes in the legislature. We don't need another one. We need to talk about things that perhaps, we can see small changes that might find another way. But we don't need to go any farther to a budget that didn't pass, can't pass, and that we don't have. Thank you so much.
If I can grab the mic, thank you, Gail, one more time. It is a bipartisan budget, and Senator Duff, were there not 3 Democratic senators that voted for this budget? Yes, there were. So it is a bipartisan budget, and there were 5 House members that voted for the Republican budget. Our biggest job as legislators is to come out with a budget by the end of the session. We've had the Democratic majority has had since January 7th to do a budget, and they still don't have a budget passed. Here's Fred Wilms.
Hi, good morning, everyone. How are you? It's always great to be here because, well, I represent this part of Norwalk. So where we are is I'm your state legislator, and it's been a real privilege for me to do so. You know, what I'd like to do is, first of all, I would like to say that, you know, there was a discussion here earlier about cuts to the education part of the budget. And as you can imagine, you know, the budget is about 900 pages long. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of line items, and it's $20 billion. And I have to say that it's pretty, I would be shocked if anybody agreed with 100% of that. I don't think I do. So that's a normal thing where a budget comes out and people are going to make legitimate critiques and criticisms and say, hey, I think we should do this instead of that, or we should do more here or less there. And you know what? We get that. And so what we're doing is, as part of the process, as part of the negotiations with the governor, is we've come out with our budget that's bipartisan, and we're now here listening to what people think about it. And we get that some people say, you know what, maybe we shouldn't cut the UConn part of the budget so much. And I think that should be part of the conversation when we sit down with the governor and say, hey, look, this is what we've been hearing. And you know, let's take a second look at that. And there's other areas as well that we've been receiving comments. Just to step back for a minute, I think many of you are aware that we in Connecticut are in an economic and fiscal crisis. That's the big picture. People are leaving our state. And, you know, in terms of, I don't like pointing blame, but you know what, you can point it at everyone. Both parties, both sides, there's no one that has a monopoly on that. But here we are. All we can do is look forward. We can't look back. And the fact is that we have a budget that the revenues grow at 0% a year, and our expenses grow at 5% a year. And that's the definition of a fiscal crisis. And we have to balance our budget. We're not like the federal government where we can print money or borrow and paper over things. We actually have to balance it. We either have to cut spending or raise taxes. These are the only options. So, and the fact of the matter is that the majority party this year has failed to do their job, which is to pass a budget. And they had, I think, to my estimation, at least 6 opportunities since April to do so, and they failed. So we stepped up. We, the Republicans, are the minority party. And, you know, as a minority party, it's always easy to say, you know, we're just going to say no. We're going to oppose everything. And then we'll just critique and just go home. But you know what we did? We said, you know what, that's not good enough. Our state's in a crisis. We have a responsibility to step up. And whether you like it or not, we stepped up. And we have a budget. And our budget does not raise sales taxes, does not raise income taxes, does not raise property taxes, doesn't raise taxes on your cell phones, like my other colleagues wanted to propose. We don't raise taxes on second homes in Connecticut, and in a bunch of other ways. So we've stayed true to that promise. The other thing that we have focused on is, quite frankly, it's on employee compensation. 40% of the state budget is related to compensation to state employees. That's wages, that's health care, that's pensions, and that's post-retirement health care. A lot of those folks are getting paid a lot more than what they would get in the private sector. And what we've said is, you know what, we need to realign things to the private sector level. People don't get free health care or pensions anymore. We're now on 401ks. We're now as part of HSA medical plans. And we need to move towards that. And our budget moves towards that. And we're committed to making sure that every state employee earns at least as much of what they earn in the private sector. As my colleagues pointed out, because of the CBAC union deal, which locked in 40% of our cost structure, we now have fewer options in which to deal with our budget crisis, our $5 billion deficit, and billions of dollars of deficits going forward. We have fewer pieces to work with. And one of the things that we've tried to do is protect the part of the budget that funds human and social services, because that's gotten whacked the last 2 years. Care for kids, people with mental disabilities, people who have Alzheimer's, autism, things like that, medical expenses. We've really tried to protect that, and we're going to continue to do so. So I'll wrap up by saying this. Look, we're in the middle of a crisis. It's going to take several years for us to get out of it. And, so really what we're left with are bad choices. There's no good choice out there. Like, gee, if we just do this and everybody agrees with it, we solve the problem. Unfortunately, we're not at that point. So we now have to make choices that are maybe less bad than maybe some other choices. And that's what we've tried to do. And we get that not everyone's going to like it. Nobody likes everything anyway. But what we are willing to do is, first of all, get the job done. We passed the budget. We got it done. And we did get Democratic support. And we want to work with both sides of the aisle. We want to work with the governor. We want to meet with the governor. You know, if he says, look, I got 10 things about your budget that I don't like, and that's, well, okay, well then maybe you give on 5 and maybe we give on 5. And then we get it done. So that's our approach. We're willing to listen. We get that not everyone's going to like everything, and we want to take that in and see what we can do to just get the job done for Connecticut, and then we can build on this and start moving our state forward. So thank you very much for listening.
Any questions? Ask any questions?
Any questions?
Why haven't negotiations begun yet?
They haven't negotiated.
Republican leadership met with the governor on Friday, and there is a meeting today, as we understand it, among leaders of both parties of the government.
Yes.
We can't hear you very well.
I'm one of those state workers,
Yes.
and we don't make more than people in the private sector. Many of us choose to be here even knowing that we would make more in the private sector. We also pay for our health insurance and pay for our pensions. It disturbs me that for so long people have positioned the state workers as getting bloated salaries and all kinds of extra benefits. That may have been true 40 years ago, but it's certainly not true now. And many of us haven't had raises in 4 or 5 years. So we're all trying to do our part too.
Well, and thank you for saying that. And it's I don't doubt what you're saying about your position. I really don't. And sometimes, in life you have sort of like competing universes. Someone will say, this has been my experience, and I totally believe that. And then, there'll be other experiences that maybe are different, and that may be true too. We have to try to reconcile that. I guess all I can say is that, speaking, globally, because I'm afraid I don't know your personal situation, is that studies have shown that state employee wages are about comparable to what they would get in the private sector. So I would agree with you there. As far as benefits, the fact is that most people in the private sector are now on health savings account, high deductible plans, as are the Norwalk teachers, until recently. And many state workers are not. That's just a fact. The other fact is that most people, when they're retired, do not get health care when they're retired from their employer anymore. And the state does provide that. And then also people don't get pensions. Most people are now on 401ks. And that's not the case in the state situation. There's still, old style defined contribution plans. So again, my thought on that, and we did this here in Norwalk when I served as the BE chair in Norwalk with Mayor Moshe, is that I don't think it's fair for current employees to change the rules on them while they're still here. I really don't. And so what we did in Norwalk going forward was, look, after this date in the future, if you're hired by the city, you are on 401ks, you're on HSA medical, you don't pay more post-retirement health care. Those who are still here, if you want to switch to that, that's great. We don't expect you to, but if you do, you can keep your plans. But we have to kick in some more. And so I understand that it needs to be fair to everyone, that it's a transition, and and I just want you to know that I certainly respect it. Thank you.
Andy, my question. As a mayoral candidate, and I'm sure the other mayoral candidates want the same answer, with your current budget as it stands, do you fully fund education in Norwalk?
Thank you very much for that question, Andy. This is something that was of the highest priority in our budget, to protect education funding and not to create any surprises. So for 2018, Norwalk has a slight increase in the combined amount that it would receive under this budget from the state for ECS, education, ECS, special ed, priority school grants, etc. And after that, if the formula takes over in 2019, gradually over time, as we add more money to the formula, the amount that Norwalk would get would go up. So yes, we do not, I should say no, the budget does not take any funding away from Norwalk schools. And the priority grant remains in effect next year.